In 1861, Abraham Lincoln, the President of the Union, declared war on the seceding Southern states. The country was split between the idea of slavery and states' rights. Winning the Civil War required smart decisions and thinking. The North had the advantage of the resources, while the South had the advantage of being on the defensive side. Also, the Southern troops knew the land well and could maneuver easily around. The outcome would depend on how well strategies and tactics were performed. Originally named the Boa Constrictor Plan, the Anaconda Plan, proposed by Winfield Scott, sent 60,000 troops down to the Mississippi River with gunboats to secure the river from Cairo, Illinois. Its purpose was to form a blockade on southern ports. Its main idea was to squeeze the South to death because it would block out all trade and imports coming into the South, destroying the Southern economy. With an effective blockade, it would seal off the South, leaving them isolated and disorganized. Proposed by Gideon Welles and favored by William Seward, this plan was to establish borders around periphery of the Confederacy and wait for the South to manifest themselves to lead to a negotiable peace. But this strategy concedes the slavery issue in order to restore the Union. The strategy that Lincoln was determined to pursue was aggressive penetration of the South. The South had two major lines of vulnerability: several thousand miles of virtually undefended seacoast running from Norfolk, Virginia, around the tip of Florida, and along the Gulf of Mexico to New Orleans, and in the west, almost 1,000 miles of the Mississippi River. Stretching from St. Louis to New Orleans, which constituted a line of access into the Deep South and for the Southerners, and obstacles separating them from their trans-Mississippi allies, Texas, Arkansas, and Missouri. Overall, this leaves the South vulnerable in many places. The strategy developed by Lincoln, his cabinet, and General Winfield Scott took account of the points of Southern vulnerability. But the focus of public attention remained fixed on the two armies that confronted each other in Virginia: the Army of Potomac and the Army of Northern Virginia. The Confederacy decided to base their attack strategy off the American Revolution fighting style and follow in the footsteps of the great George Washington. But two main factors prevented Davis from carrying out such a strategy. Both factors stemmed from political as well as military realities. The first was the demand by governors, congressmen, and the public for troops to defend every portion of the Confederacy from penetration by Lincoln's abolition hordes. In 1861, small armies were dispersed around the Confederate perimeter along the Arkansas-Missouri border, at several points on the Gulf Atlantic coasts, along the Tennessee-Kentucky border, and in the Shenandoah Valley and Western Virginia, as well as Manassas, Virginia. Historians have criticized this cordon defense for dispersing manpower so thinly that Union forces were certain to break through somewhere, as they did at several points in 1862. The Confederacy planned that they would win the war through a defensive strategy. According to their battle plans, the Confederacy did not actually have to win. They just had to not lose. The Union, on the other hand, had to actually win. This gave the Confederacy the advantage of home ground. In the beginning of the war, the Confederacy used a strategy like that of George Washington in the Revolution. Washington traded space for time. He would retreat only when necessary in the face of a stronger enemy. He counterattacked against isolated British outposts or detachments when such an attack promised success. Above all, he tried to avoid full-scale battles that would have risked annihilation of his army in defeat of his cause. This had been called a strategy of attrition, a strategy of winning by not losing, of wearing out a better-equipped foe and compelling him to give up by prolonging the war and making it too costly. Like George Washington, the Confederacy used an effective, risky defensive strategy. Also, the positions of the war were closely related to that of the American Revolution, where the seceding South were like the American colonists, trying to live their own way of life. During the Civil War, both sides used their infantry to their advantage. The infantry was mainly comprised of foot soldiers with small arms. Generals in the Civil War mainly used Napoleonic tactics. They marched their men out in tightly closed formations, often with soldiers elbow to elbow in double-ranked battle lines. Many men on both sides attacked fiercely using their well-taught infantry techniques. Without strategy, the Civil War would be a war that would not be able to be won by either side. Because both sides had amazing leadership, the Union and Confederacy had to use strategy to outsmart the opponent.